This week's Torah portion covers Exodus 10:1 to 13:6. In Hebrew it is called bo, which can mean go or come. The last three of the 10 plagues descend on Egypt. Locust, impenetrable darkness shrouds the land, and finally the firstborns of every Egyptian family are killed during the night. On the night of the final plague, the Israelites were instructed to sacrifice a lamb as their Passover offering. They were to take the blood of the lamb and paint their doorpost with it as a sign to the angel of death that God-fearing Israelites were present. Every household who obeyed this command was spared or passed over. Pharaoh only then would understand that God distinguishes between Egypt and Israel. But that same night, God instituted the first Passover Seder dinner. Jews were instructed to eat the roasted meat of the lamb offering with bitter herbs and unleavened bread, or matzah. They were commanded to eat in haste. It is striking to me that before the fog lifts from a plague-ridden Egypt and before the Israelites are out from under Pharaoh's hand, God commands the Israelites to ritualize a new feast. It would have been much more strategic for Moses to spend his time planning an exit route, gathering weapons and supplies, or establishing leadership. Instead, they have a sacred dinner. God is already making provisions so that they do not forget the miracles he has performed before he has even finished performing them. God writes a holy script for the sacred remembrance. Jews are to abstain from leaven for 7 days. They are to rest from work and hold assemblies at the start and finish of the week. Essentially, God designed a ritual which will make certain that the Jews institute the Exodus in their collective memory. Their Egypt experience binds them as a people who share a history of oppression, but also one where they are commanded to remember God's signs and wonders and his outstretched arm. In this sense, the Passover Seder is an explicitly Jewish observance. It is arguably quintessential to the Jewish faith. According to Israeli statistics, 90% of Israelis conduct a Seder dinner every year, and 70% of Jewish Americans do. This makes Passover the most commonly observed feast on the Jewish calendar, even more than Yom Kippur or Sukkot. So why are more and more Christians starting to observe some kind of Passover dinner? The first and most obvious answer to that question is Jesus did it. The Last Supper was the disciples meeting to observe the Passover with wine and matzah and herbs. When Jesus commands his followers to eat this bread and drink this cup in remembrance of me, he is referring to moments of ritual in the Passover dinner and holding up the Passover elements of wine and matzah. In my opinion, there is no richer and more authentic way to take communion than in the context of a Passover Seder. Once in Israel, my husband and I were having a Seder dinner with our Orthodox Jewish neighbors when the father of the house, our friend, goes to the last cup of wine and he looked over to us and said, "I bet you're thinking about Jesus during this part." From that goosebumps kind of moment on, we have held our own Seder dinners in our home every Passover. The essence of the Passover dinner for both Jews and Christians is to celebrate God's perfect plan of redemption. God's pattern of calling for substitutionary sacrifice started with Abraham and Isaac on Mount Moriah, and it climaxed on that night in Egypt when the Israelite firstborns were consecrated instead of killed. For Christians, Jesus' death was the final act of substitutionary sacrifice. But his death meant nothing without these prior moments where God communicated the theology of redemption. So as Christians, when we observe Passover, we are not only continuing the example of Jesus in the Last Supper, we are following a prophetic thread from Genesis to the Gospels. It is also not my intention to take something Jewish and Christianize it. I try to always make clear to Jewish friends, when we observe the miracles of the Exodus and relive God's act of deliverance for the Israelites, we are also allying with them, and I hope partnering with Jews in the commitment to continue fighting for the freedom of the oppressed in today's world. When we get to Leviticus in the Torah cycle, I will share more specifics about how my family conducts a Seder dinner, and I'll share materials for passing on this rich and prophetic tradition to you and your family. Shabbat Shalom.